So what happens when a global superpower just implodes? That's exactly what we're talking about today, the French Revolution. This wasn't just a small rebellion. It was a decade of pure chaos that completely upended Europe and really changed how we even think about power itself.
Okay, so I want you to picture this. It's Paris, 1789. The air is just thick. You can smell bread, sure, but you can also smell sweat and something else, rebellion. That whole old world, the one with glittering palaces and all-powerful kings, well, it's about to get torn down, and not gently. This is way more than a protest. It's a wildfire that's about to change everything.
Right, so the big question is how? How does a nation like France, which was basically the center of culture and power in Europe, just completely fall apart like this? Well, the thing is, it wasn't one single thing. It was more like a perfect storm of problems that have been building up for a long, long time.
If you were looking at France from the outside in the 18th century, you'd think they had it all figured out. They were a powerhouse of trade, had a huge population, and all these amazing new ideas were coming out of the Enlightenment. But that was just the surface. Underneath all that glitter was a society that was just fundamentally broken, and those cracks were about to bring the whole building down.
So let's start with the first and maybe the biggest crack in the foundation. It was something called the Ancien Regime, which is just French for the old regime. And what was it? Basically, it was the super rigid social and political system that had been running France for centuries. And the whole thing was built on one idea: massive, legally enforced inequality. And this is where it gets really crazy. Just look at this population split. A whopping 97% of everybody in France was part of what they called the Third Estate. That's pretty much everyone. The other groups, the clergy and the nobility, made up a tiny, tiny 3%. But here's the kicker. That little 3% held almost all of the country's wealth and power. Insane, right?
Yeah, this wasn't just some abstract idea. This social pyramid determined your entire life from the moment you were born. At the very top, you had the First Estate, that's the clergy. Right below them, the Second Estate, the super rich nobles. And then, at the very bottom, holding the whole thing up and getting crushed by the weight of it all, was that massive Third Estate.
So what did that actually mean for people? Well, get this. The First and Second Estates, that tiny privilege group, owned about 30% of all the land in France but paid practically zero taxes. Meanwhile, the Third Estate, and remember that's everyone else, from doctors and lawyers down to the poorest farmers, they had to pay heavy taxes on pretty much everything. They were carrying the entire country on their backs, financially speaking.
And this cartoon right here from back then, it just sums it all up perfectly. You've got this poor old peasant who stands for the Third Estate, literally being crushed under the weight of a clergyman and a nobleman riding on his back. This wasn't just a funny drawing, this was pure political fire. It captured all that rage and bitterness that was just bubbling right under the surface all over France.
All right, so ingredient number 1 for our revolution, massive social injustice. Check. Now, let's throw in ingredient number 2, a catastrophic economic crisis. Because not only was French society totally unfair, but the kingdom was also flat broke.
I mean, the government's debt was just astronomical. It had basically doubled. And you want to know a big reason why? Because France had spent a fortune helping fund the American Revolution. It's kind of ironic, right? They helped another country win its freedom, but in doing so, they completely bankrupted themselves.
And while the entire country is teetering on the edge of financial collapse, what's the monarchy up to? Oh, just living it up at the Palace of Versailles, completely clueless. King Louis XVI, and especially his Queen Marie Antoinette, just kept spending like there was no tomorrow. Her parties, her dresses, her jewelry, it was so over the top that people started calling her Madame Deficit. Talk about bad PR.
And look, this wasn't just about abstract numbers on some royal accountant's books. This crisis hit ordinary people, right where it hurts the most, in the gut. A couple of bad harvests led to massive food shortages. And by 1789, the price of bread, the one thing that poor families relied on to survive, had doubled. We're talking about people literally starving to death in the streets.
So let's recap, shall we? You've got a government with no money, you've got a population with no food, and you've got a king who's just weak and can't seem to make a decision to save his life. It's a pressure cooker situation, and you can hear it whistling. Something's got to give. And in the summer of 1789, it did. The whole thing just exploded. All those years of frustration, hunger, and pure anger finally boiled over into open, full-blown rebellion. And once things started moving, they moved fast. It's almost hard to keep up. The king, in a last-ditch effort to get some cash, calls a meeting of all three estates, the Estates General. But that plan backfires like immediately. It spirals out of his control, leads to this incredible moment of defiance on a tennis court, and ends with a violent, bloody attack on a famous prison.
It all came down to a fight over something that sounds simple but was absolutely critical: how they were going to vote. See, the old way was that each estate got one single vote. So the clergy and the nobles, the tiny 3%, could always just team up and outvote the 97% every single time. The third estate said, no way. They wanted a new system. One person, one vote. That would finally give the people an actual voice. And the king's response? A hard no.
And that was it. That was the last straw. The third estate basically said, fine, we'll do it ourselves. They went off and declared that they were now the National Assembly. They're essentially saying, we're in charge now. We represent the people of France. This was a huge deal. It was a direct challenge to the king, an act of open revolution. So a few days later, they show up to their meeting hall. And what do you know? The doors are locked. The king's trying to shut them down. But did that stop them? Not a chance. They just walked over to a nearby indoor tennis court, of all places, and took a famous oath. They swore they would not leave until they had written a brand new constitution for France. Just try to picture that for a second. It's an incredible moment of defiance.
Now, while all this political maneuvering is happening in Versailles, things in the streets of Paris are getting tense, really tense. Rumors are flying everywhere. People are saying the king is sending in the army to crush the National Assembly and slaughter everyone. So the people of Paris decide they need to fight back. They need weapons. And they knew just where to go: the Bastille, a terrifying old prison that had become the ultimate symbol of the king's brutal power. So on July 14th, a huge, angry mob storms the Bastille, looking for gunpowder. The fighting is intense, but it's over pretty quickly. The commander of the prison is captured and killed. And then, in a truly grisly scene, they put his head on a pike and parade it through the city. This was something different. This wasn't just a riot anymore. This was a clear, violent message. The old rules were dead.
The storming of the Bastille, that was the point of no return. After that, there was no going back. The French Revolution was officially on.
I mean, that one event sent shockwaves through the entire country. It showed everyone that the people, ordinary, everyday people, could actually stand up to the king's power and win. The monarchy wasn't untouchable after all. And from that moment on, it wasn't the king calling the shots anymore. It was the people in the streets. So, in just a few short weeks, they had managed to tear down a system that had been in place for centuries. An incredible achievement. But it leaves us with a terrifying question, doesn't it? Okay, you've destroyed the old world. Now what? Are you going to build to replace it? And more importantly, how much more blood would be spilled before they had an answer?